She is a postdoctoral fellow in our clinical neuropsychology program. And she works with the cognitive empowerment program, but she also works with Emory's Department of Rehabilitation Medicine. She completed her doctoral program in clinical psychology at the University of Florida and has been doing her postdoctoral work here at Emory. And, Lisa's really bringing a lot of her expertise about her dissertation in with her. It was focused on the use of cognitive compensation strategies. So we're going to really kind of dive into what that means, especially after all the work that she's been doing in line with that. And at CEP, she offers classes and sessions that are all about maintaining independence in day-to-day activities, and using some of these to support that, to be able to continue to do what you love to do every day. So Lise, go ahead and take it away for us.
Thank you so much, Megan, for that really kind introduction. And I'm so happy to be back here as part of CEP Live. So like Megan already mentioned, I will be talking about power of writing. And we're going to talk about two different kinds of writing. I'd like to talk with you all about both note-taking and also journaling. And we'll discuss the advantages that both of those kinds of writing bring. So we know that note-taking can really be beneficial. When people get in the habit of taking copious notes, it can really help compensate for difficulties with memory. There's an old Chinese proverb that says that the palest ink is better than the best memory, and that still holds true today. Writing is also really beneficial for mental health. There are many historic figures that have lived through wars and other types of traumatic events that have written diaries to help process all that's going on around them. So one famous example that I think many of you may have heard of is Anne Frank, who was a Jewish girl that kept a diary in which she documented her life in hiding under Nazi persecution. And that can be beneficial, but I just want to also already mention that writing and journaling can also be really beneficial with more day-to-day stressors. So you definitely don't need to be in a war kind of situation to be able to benefit from journaling and other sorts of writing. So what I'm going to start with today is talking about the implication of note-taking for memory and planning related tasks, because like Megan already mentioned, that is really what I have focused on for most of my career so far. And then later on, we'll talk a little bit more about journaling and mental health, which is a newer area for me. So before we really dive in, I want to talk a little bit about forgetfulness in general. So forgetfulness is a very common complaint in adults of all ages, and that's because our memory and attention are selective. We can't remember everything that's going on around us, or even attend to everything that's going on around us, because it would just be too much. So I'd like everyone to think about whether you ever have trouble with forgetfulness. And if that's the case, what kind of information do you sometimes forget? Is it, for example, names of new people that you meet, let's say a new neighbor? Or is it, for example, appointments or other to-do items, other things that you have in your to-do list? Or is it details of recent conversations? Or is it something else? So before I really dive into talking about forgetfulness and how to get around that a little more, I'd like you all to think about it, and feel free to fill out our poll here, just for us to get a little bit of a sense of what people tend to struggle with. And you don't need to have any MCI or diagnosed memory difficulties to fill this out, because everyone forgets sometimes. So feel free to take a few seconds to do that. All right. And don't worry if you haven't had a chance to do it yet. It's just for us to kind of get a sense. So feel free to close that poll, Megan. Okay, so I think everyone can see our results here. So what we see is that a lot of people indicate that they have trouble with remembering names of new people. And then we also have a good portion of people that have some trouble with remembering either appointments or to do items, and that have some trouble with remembering details of recent conversations. So, those are all very different kinds of information. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that is relevant in just a little bit. Um, let's see. So, let me just click through here. So, before I really talk about why and how note taking is most beneficial, I want to talk to you a little bit about how memory actually works, because I think it will help you get a better sense of how you can intervene too. So, when we think about our memory, there are really three processes that we are interested in, and that tend to happen when you try to remember something. So, the first one we call encoding, and that's really getting the information into your memory. Then the second stage is storage, and that is your ability to maintain that information into your memory over time. And then the last stage we call retrieval. So that is the ability to pull that information out of your memory. Sometimes people have kind of a tip of the tongue effect where they know it, but they can't quite get it out themselves. And another piece that I want to mention here is that attention is also really important for memory. Sometimes people tell me, I can't remember details of conversations or things like that. When we talk a little bit more about it, we find out that they actually have trouble focusing on the conversation. And of course, if you have trouble focusing, it's also going to be harder to get that information in your memory and maintain that information over time. So, kind of thinking about these different kinds of memory, we can intervene in several parts of these, or several of these processes with note taking. So, when we think of note taking, we can think about different kinds of behavioral interventions that we do. So, I want to briefly also explain how behavioral interventions sometimes work. And there's a distinction between the two main types of interventions that we do. The first is aimed at restoring functions that are impaired. So, if you were to break your leg, for example, you would get maybe a surgery that would heal your leg. The second one is kind of compensating for lost function. So, if you were to break your leg, you could use crutches to help you get around. And that is really similar to when we think about memory. Um, so even though we'd love to have strategies to really improve the memory networks in your brain, we have not been quite successful in being able to do that yet. That's really complex. But what we do know is that we have really helpful workarounds that can help you function better in your day to day. And note taking is really one of those. So, why does note taking benefit our memory? Well, firstly, when we think about that encoding phase, so getting that information in, what we do when we take notes is we have to think about that information again. And we know that repetition is beneficial for our memory. Just like when you think about maybe back when you were in school and you had to study for a test, you probably had to read the information more than once, unless you're extremely smart. But most people have had to read information more than once in order to remember it. And that just shows, and research has also shown, that more repetition can help getting that information in better. And so when we take notes, we are repeating that information again to ourselves. And then also, when we write things down, we tend to think about kind of a structure of how it would make most sense to write it down. And so we have to kind of organize that information. And that's kind of similar to, let's say you were to write down a grocery list. Maybe in the process of doing that, you'll think of all the vegetables first, and then you'll think about all the dairy products or all the proteins. Or maybe you'll think of all the ingredients that you'll need for one recipe, and then all the ingredients that you'll need for a cake. that you're also wanting to make. Whatever it is, we tend to think about structure and tend to be more organized when we write down our information, when we take notes. And what we know is that when we are more organized in thinking about something, it also will help us really getting that information into our memory. So that's why writing things down can help us encode the information well. But then notes also help with that retrieval phase, which again is kind of pulling the information out of your memory. So an example of that is when we write things down. Let's say we write down call Frank, okay, on either a post-it note or in your calendar. Now, if you would have not written that down, maybe you would have forgotten to call Frank altogether. But when you see that information, now you might be able to remember the reason why you wanted to call Frank. And it may also jog your memory about what time you wanted to call him and what exactly you wanted to talk about. And so when we have a few words that we write down, sometimes that jogs our memory for a whole lot more. It can pull a whole lot more information out of our memory. So that's another reason why note taking is beneficial, is because it can kind of help with that retrieval phase. So there are many beneficial ways of taking notes. One very structured way is this memory support system. And this is a system that's been central to my dissertation work, like Megan said, at the University of Florida. This is a system that was developed by Glenn Smith and Melanie Greenaway, and it's a compensatory system for people with difficulties with their memory and organization planning. It's based on the traumatic brain injury literature, because people with traumatic brain injury sometimes also have trouble with forgetting and with planning. So as you can see, it's basically just a calendar, and it consists of 3 different sections: a scheduled events and appointments section, an action item section that really is an opportunity to list all the things that you need to do that day, and a notes and journaling section for that day. And this calendar also includes an opportunity to do check marks so that it can help you remember whether or not you already completed the activity. So this system, like I said, aims to support both our memory and our organization skills. Some people might say, I have a calendar too. What makes this memory support system any different? And I think there is absolutely a truth to that. But there has been some research that has been done that shows that when you're really structured and organized about what you write down, it can be beneficial. So I'll speak to that a little bit more in just a moment. So one study that has been done included people with MCI and a program partner, and they included 40 of those dyads in total. And then for 20 of those dyads, they said, okay, here are these calendars. We have developed them. We think that they work, and you should try and start using them. For the 20 other dyads, what they did is they did the same thing. They provided these people with the calendaring system, but they also provided them with 12 training sessions in which they taught those dyads on how to most effectively use this calendar system. And what they found is that about 2 months later, the people who also received those training sessions actually were rated by their program partners, so usually a family member, as having better activities of daily living. So they were a little bit more independent. They had better self-confidence in those activities of daily living. They reported less emotional distress than the no training group. And their program partners also reported better mood. So I think that speaks to that even though we all know how to use the calendar, it can still be beneficial to learn some additional techniques. Also because it can help you be more consistent. And I'll talk to you all in a little bit more about what you could do at home that would be more similar to what they did in these kinds of trainings. But before I do that, I'd like to talk a little bit more about another study that shows some support of that this kind of training can be beneficial. So in this other study, what was done was they compared people that did computerized brain training. So those brain games like Lumosity or Brain HQ, I can't remember which ones they used exactly. And then they had a memory support system training group. So the people that were taught those calendaring classes, and they had a no intervention group. And what they found is that people that received the memory support training classes, so the calendaring classes, showed improved activities of daily living when compared to the people that didn't get any intervention at all. But when they compared the computer training group, so those computerized brain games, to the control group, they did not find any improvements. So again, that shows that this can really help in people's day to day. Now, one thing that I studied as part of my dissertation, or one component of that, was that really the sooner you start incorporating techniques like this, the better. What we know is that sometimes MCI can get worse with time. And what we have seen is that when people try to learn this, even before they really need it, so when their memory is still pretty good, they're usually they're usually better able to build these kinds of habits that are beneficial. So they're better able to become really consistent in writing things down, things like that. And then what my dissertation also showed is that those who really were able to build those habits and were able to learn all those different calendaring techniques also were able to continue to use that calendar better 6, 12, and 18 months post training. So they were better able to kind of maintain those habits over time. And of course, only if you're able to maintain the use of a compensatory system like a calendar are you able to also benefit from it in your daily function. Another piece that I want to talk about is a study that was done by a colleague of mine at the Mayo Clinic. And what she found is that she looked at different kinds of personality traits. And she looked at whether personality traits could predict which people would really benefit from the calendar. And what she found is that openness to new experiences as a personality trait was predictive of how well people were able to learn that calendar. And I think the main takeaway of that is that as with any new strategy that you're trying out, it can be helpful to look at it with an open mind. We sometimes have people tell us, I have always used a calendar. I don't really feel like I need to learn this new technique, or it's not really for me. And, of course, just like with any kind of strategy, not, what works for some people doesn't work for everyone. But I do encourage people to try out new things, even if it feels a little bit uncomfortable at first, and to keep an open mind as you're trying it and not to give up when it feels a little odd, maybe in the beginning. And you might find that when you get past that initial phase, when things feel a little uncomfortable, you can start feeling more comfortable. And that's really when you get the most benefit out of these kinds of strategies. So I told you about a whole lot of research so far about why or how this has shown to be beneficial. But how can that apply to you? So again, I had you all think about the types of difficulties that you can have with forgetfulness. Most people have forgetfulness sometimes. And what kind of information you tend to forget can be different for different people. So some people might forget the names of people that they meet, or names of appointments or other to-do items, or they might forget details of recent conversation, or they might forget other information. Now, the reason that I had you all think about that is because becoming aware of what you struggle with is a really important piece in this puzzle. It really allows you to intervene. And when you think back of those different um, phases of memory, like I said, the first part is really paying attention to what's going on. And so when you are aware of what you struggle with, it also gives you an opportunity to pay more attention to those kinds of things. And I'm just going to um, double check that I'm not missing anything in the chat. Okay. So I see that there's some things in the chat, and I love that. So please keep putting things in the chat. I probably won't address them during the talk, but I'm going to make sure that we have enough time after the talk to go through all of those. So keep just dropping in there what you'd like me to answer. Okay, so again, becoming aware of what you struggle with is a really important first piece. And that allows you to be intentional about paying attention to the things that you're most forgetful about. So let's talk a little bit more about concrete things that you could do at home. So some examples of notes that can help you are, just writing down typical calendar information like scheduled events and appointments. A lot of people also use to-do list information. So that can help even with just feeling like you have a lot on your plate. It's just getting it all out on paper on a to-do list. And it allows you to check off what you've done. And for other information, you can also write that down, but it might be a little less typical in how you do that. So we'll talk more about that. That would include things like names of new information, names of new people that you meet, like a new neighbor, your new physical therapist, important medical information during a doctor's visit, important information from conversations, daily medical information, reflections on how you felt or what things were, what something was like for you. And again, it's going to depend on the person, what would be most beneficial for you to write down. So I'd like for everyone to just think about that. And then depending on the kind of information that you think you would benefit from writing down, you can also, that can also help you decide on what you should use for it. So for example, the scheduled events or appointments or action items or to-do lists, you might just use a general calendar. Well, for those other types of information that I mentioned, a notebook or even just a digital notes app in your phone can be beneficial. And, a lot of people ask me about, should I be using, for example, a paper calendar, or should I take notes with my pen in my paper notebook, or is it okay if I do that on my laptop? And the literature on that is kind of mixed. So there have been some studies on that really early on that provided primarily evidence for that writing things down on paper is particularly beneficial. And it suggests that there might be something about, doing the actual writing that helps your memory. But there are some newer studies that suggest that it kind of depends. And that particularly with more distraction, taking notes on a computer might be more beneficial. And what I suspect, and I don't have evidence for this necessarily, is that there might be kind of a cohort effect. So that for older generations or individuals who have always just had a preference for using a paper calendar and taking handwritten notes, for those people, I think it's going to be most beneficial to continue to do that because it can be really hard to also switch to kind of a new medium. But people who have been using computers and their phone really well and are very used to, using their digital calendar and have been doing that for, a decade at least or so, it might be just fine for you to continue to use that. And digital calendars or digital apps also have some beneficial effects because they can kind of help you streamline some things, or you can set alarms. So it's really up to you what you find most beneficial. And I think you can really just trust your gut with that, kind of go with what you're most comfortable with. A little bit more of what you can do at home to be able to benefit from your notes and from calendaring and taking, being uh, writing down notes as consistently as possible. The first thing is to be organized. So think about, like we talked about earlier, which kind of information you want to record and where and how you want to do it. Then also be consistent. That is probably the hardest part, but it can be really beneficial to think about, which times of the day you're going to be taking notes. Do you want to do that every day before you go to bed, or first thing when you wake up, or both? Or do you want to just write things down as you kind of think about, you meet a new person, you write it down right then and there so that you don't forget their name? Kind of depends again on the information that you struggle with and what you think would be most beneficial for you. And then the next piece is to build habits. So what we know, just like when you start to exercise, is or start to incorporate something else that you know is healthy for you, but it can be hard to get into it. What we know is that it's a whole lot easier when you get into the habit of exercising every Tuesday and every Thursday with a friend. That's easier than having to think every day of, should I go do this or should I not? And it's the same with those notes. So once you get in the habit of doing that every day or multiple times a day, it's going to start being easier on you. So don't get discouraged if it seems hard and overwhelming at first, because it will get easier. So that is everything that I wanted to say about note taking and why it's beneficial and how it can be most beneficial. I'd also like to talk to you all a little bit about journaling and the impact of journaling on mood. So I already mentioned that journaling is a technique that's used to relieve stress, and it's really an ancient technique. It's been used for decades, probably longer, and it's used in many psychotherapies. For example, for anxiety, depression, and other mental health conditions. And it's also shown to reduce stress in people who don't necessarily have difficulties with their mental health, but they're going through treatment for medical conditions. So it's really beneficial for mood and for stress reduction all around. Now, there's some evidence that what you journal about can make a difference. So there are some studies that show that journaling is most beneficial when you both write about your thoughts and about your feelings. So just a few prompts for you all to think about. For example, how do you can, for example, describe the situation, but then also include something like, how does that make you feel? How do you feel about it? Or you can write down how you've tried to make sense of a situation that's difficult for you. And what do you tell yourself about it? And what helps you cope with it? If the situation that you're describing does not really make sense to you yet, or if it's difficult to cope with, it can also be beneficial to describe how you would help other people deal with it and how your feelings may change as you think about it more. Another study that has been done shows that when you use gratitude journaling, that can be even more beneficial than standard journaling. So gratitude journaling is really focused on the things that you're grateful for. Now, I do want to use a big disclaimer here, because what we know tends to work best is when we also make space for the things that are difficult. So we don't want you to only try to focus on sunshine and rainbows. Because when things are difficult, it's also helpful to make space for that. But with gratitude journaling, you can also, in addition to making space for what's difficult, think about what you are grateful for, and that can be the little things like the delicious coffee that you had in the morning, or it can be bigger things like important relationships that you have that you can benefit from. So an example prompt for that could include write down 3 things for which you are grateful. Think back over your day and include anything, however small or great, that has been a source of gratitude that day. So, a little bit more on how to journal. And again, this is not rocket science. I know that you all know on how you could do that, but it still helps to kind of get started when we really break it down. So, there are many different ways in which you can journal effectively. All you need is a pen and a pencil, pen or a pencil and paper, or you could do it on a computer or a laptop, whatever is your preference. And some people actually prefer to use their voice. So you can use a voice recorder, or many smartphones actually also will allow you to record your voice. So if that has your preference, just kind of talking freely to yourself, that would have very beneficial effects too. Also, just focus on finding a safe space to journal so you feel comfortable. And again, deciding on when and how frequently you want to journal. And just get comfortable. And sometimes that can take a little bit of time and a little bit of practice, but as you do it more, you'll feel that it gets easier. So just give it a try. So a few takeaways is that just think about the difficulties that you have so that you can try to incorporate what's most beneficial for you. So do you have difficulties related to memory? If so, what kind of information do you tend to forget? And take notes for that information specifically. So what would be the best way to report that kind of information? And if you're feeling particularly stressed or you feel down, journaling might be helpful. And for both of those kinds of things, consistency is key. So build habits and routines to try to benefit from that the most. And one other thing that I'll say is it's not one or the other. You can benefit from taking notes for your memory or for difficulty with planning and organization, and also try out journaling at the same time, because both kind of get at different aspects of your mental health or your cognitive abilities. So it doesn't harm to try both, but you can also just focus on what you have the most trouble with. So here are some references of the research that I talked about, and I'd like to acknowledge my mentors and also the CEP program, the Cox Foundation. And thank you all so much for your time. I'd be happy to take any questions. I know that there are already some in the chat, and I've also included a few prompts of the different pieces that I talked about in case you have questions about any of those kind of main pieces that I talked about.
Thank you, Lise. And it was so good. Maybe some of these tools or recommendations you are using at home, and maybe some of them are new or good reminders. So it's good to pick some new ones up. The biggest question that we keep getting in the chat is, where can we get the memory support calendars? I know that we supply them directly at the Cognitive Empowerment Program to our participants, where we teach the whole system. But is there a place or a resource that you can access those smaller pocket-sized calendars that we provide that you showed an image of?
Yeah, that is actually a great question. And we have developed those calendars, and I think we could provide a link for even people who are not in the program to order those. I think we sell them to our alumni for the same cost of what they're made for. I think it's like $30 for 6 months worth of calendars. So that could be an option, and I'll see if I can provide the link. Would there be a way for me to provide that link, Megan?
I just put our email address to reach us into the chat. The email address to get to us is empowerment@emory.edu. And since we do have links and resources to be able to provide our folks with calendars to purchase and order, we'd be happy to share that with you if you email us and just put memory support calendar into the subject and mention Lise in this talk today at the CEP Live, and we'll be able to get that information to you. So feel free to send us an email to that empowerment@emory.edu address that we just put into the chat.
Absolutely. And if you prefer a different kind of calendar, that works too. One benefit of that memory support calendar is that it has a spot for all those different kinds of information. But what we sometimes see is that people only use one section. So again, it really comes down to thinking about what you would benefit from the most.
One thing that we do notice is that a lot of our members enjoy a calendar that they can carry around with them. What do you say about those smaller pocket-sized calendars versus the wall calendars that you have at your home? Any evidence or research suggests you prefer one or the over the other?
Well, again, I think it kind of depends on what your preferences are. One benefit of having a really small pocket calendar is that you could pull it out at any point, right? So let's say you meet a new person and you tend to struggle with remembering names. It wouldn't be odd to even say, "Oh, let me just write down your name so I can make sure that I don't forget." And if you have a small pocket calendar, you can do that right then and there. If you use a wall calendar, it would be a little trickier to, write down a name of someone directly or write down an appointment that you just made directly. But one benefit that it has is that you'll be less likely to lose it, and you'll be less likely to try and find it. Sometimes what we hear from people is that with these small calendars, they might misplace it once in a while. So I think there are different pros and cons for each, and, sometimes people even use more than one kind of calendar. It's really kind of the level of time that you are wanting to invest and thinking about the benefit that it would give you specifically, given the difficulties that you have.
Those are really good points. One of the questions that has come up in the chat is also around digital versions of these memory support calendars. I know that you and your colleagues have developed this physical version, but have you guys put any effort or any resources into developing a digital version or an app for these purposes? Or do you have one that you recommend?
Well, we've thought about it quite a bit because we do get that question from people who are more tech savvy and more digitally oriented. So we're hoping to do something like that in the future. For now, we haven't yet, though, but there are, kind of standard features of either Google, Outlook, the bigger kinds of calendaring systems that people tend to use. Both for Google and for Outlook, you can have a to-do list, and you can have the general calendaring sections. And most phones, for example, also have a notes app. So I think all these different kinds of systems are available already in accounts that people may already have and apps that people may already have. So if you're interested in that, I would start just kind of playing around with um, what you think would be most helpful, because a lot of this is already out there, but we don't have an integrated app that does all of this just yet. I think that's future work for us that I think would be really cool and beneficial to do.
Yeah, something to work on and, find
Mhm.
what works for you, experiment figuring out what it is that you need support around the most, maybe even try different versions. But I love that you shared research earlier about it being something that can support less stress at home for you and your care partner. It can be a support system that helps to alleviate that question of what is happening next, which we see a lot with our participants at CEP. And one of the reasons that um, we hear that what's happening next or what's happening today can be one of those repetitive questions that gets asked a lot. We even have some of our participants who have shared, having a whiteboard in the kitchen that has the schedule for today listed that's a reflection of that small pocketbook or pocket calendar that you carry around. So you can have different versions to support what your needs are for your individual household, for whatever your loved one needs the most. And I love the recommendation too of experimenting with your phone and really getting to know the notes section in your phone, something that inevitably we all have on us at all times at this point. So use your phone. It's something that we always have in our pocket. And I just wanted to share this email address again for those of you who have questions about how to order or purchase those small calendars that are made for the memory support system. You can email us at empowerment@emory.edu for information on how to purchase those calendars that we made. And Lise, is that something that we designed at Emory, or did those come from the University of Florida? Where do those calendars come from that we're referring to?
Yeah, so they were originally designed at the Mayo Clinic. And the two original developers of this calendar and of that system, one of them then came to Emory, and another one then went to University of Florida. That was Dr. Glenn Smith, who was my PhD advisor. So that's how I started working with this system. And the person who was at Emory before now went back to Mayo Clinic. That is Dr. Melanie Chandler. But we here at Emory, we created basically the same type of calendaring system. So yeah, again, it's just a way that to integrate all that kind of information. But don't feel like we're trying to sell you this calendar specifically. I think you can get the same benefit with other calendars too. And again, it just depends on what your needs are and what you would benefit from the most.
Lise, thank you so much. Thank you for these reminders and thank you for offering your expertise as everyone continues to figure out what works best for our home. But don't forget about the small things like taking notes and keeping a journal, especially for the big moments in life, coming home after a great dinner with friends, writing down small memories or conversations or new names that you have, slipping away and writing down names as you catch them at gatherings, having all of those resources available to support those really simple recalls that Lise was talking about. So thank you, Lise. We look forward to seeing you back again on CEP Live very soon. We'll be posting all of this information to our YouTube page. You can just search Cognitive Empowerment Program and all of our channels will show up. Otherwise, we will see you all next week for a workout with Ayatoni, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, Lise.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.